Hi everyone, I'm Kristen Noel and I'm the Council Supervisor with the Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council, and today I'll be talking to you about two invasive species in Kespukwitk, Dog-strangling Vine and Phragmites. The Nova Scotia Invasive Species Council is a provincial chapter of the Canadian Council on Invasive Species, and our goal is to raise awareness and promote a coordinated response to the threat of invasive species in Nova Scotia. To start, I'll give you our definition of what an invasive species is. So an invasive species is any organism that meets the following three criteria: is non-native, spreads rapidly, and causes harm. And it has to meet all three of these. It's widely accepted that invasive species are a huge threat to biodiversity worldwide. In Canada alone, more than 20% of our species at risk are threatened with extinction by invasive species. Invasive species do this by predating native species and taking their food and space, contributing to soil degradation and erosion, and degrading water quality and habitat. Invasive species can introduce new diseases, and some have adverse effects on human health. Invasive species alter infrastructure, and from an economic viewpoint, invasive species can greatly impact productivity in forestry, agricultural, and fishing industries, as well as reduce recreational opportunities. So how do we get rid of invasive species? Well, we can start with prevention, so making sure they don't get here in the first place. And then we go to early detection and rapid response, so making sure that we're aware when they do get detected and that we can have a quick response to them. And finally, once invasive species are here and established, we can manage them. And we can do this with a lot of different ways. We have some behavior change programs that are implemented to encourage people to change the way they go about their recreational activities or hobbies to prevent the spread of invasive species. And I won't go too much into all of these programs here, but some of our more popular ones, Clean, Drain, Dry, and Play, Clean, Go, just encourage people cleaning off their equipment before and after leaving water or a natural space to avoid any invasive hitchhikers that might be on their clothing or gear. The first species that I'll talk to you about that we've worked on in Kespukwitk this past summer is Dog-strangling Vine. So Dog-strangling Vine is composed of two species, pale swallowwort and black swallowwort. It was transported from the Ukraine by horticulturalists to be used as vines in public and recreational gardens because they twine on themselves and they create these really dense mats, which people used to like for privacy because they would climb up fences. And they primarily spread through natural processes such as wind and seed dispersal. Some of the impacts of dog-strangling vine include native plant biodiversity, so they outcompete native species for space, sunlight, and water and nutrients, and they create these huge dense mats that don't allow other species to pop through, so we normally find dog-strangling vine in a very dense monoculture, which reduces native biodiversity. And it also has impacts on the monarch butterfly. So monarch larvae are specialists on milkweed, but field evidence suggests that monarchs will lay eggs on dog-strangling vine. However, the larvae feeding on dog-strangling vine don't actually develop, and it can result in death, which can cause a generational loss of pollinators. This is the distribution of dog-strangling vine in North America. And this is the distribution in Nova Scotia. So you'll note that there's only two populations, one in Halifax, Dartmouth area, and then one in Kentville. So for this project, we were focused on the one in Kentville. And this is a blown up version of where it is exactly in Kentville. So this is along Sesame Street in North Kentville. The red indicates where we have a high priority population or stands, and the yellow is low priority, and all of the rest has been surveyed but is marked absent. So in 2021, we began outreach with local residents and coordinated with the municipality of Kings and the town of Kentville to spread awareness about dog-strangling vine and teach homeowners and landowners why they didn't want it on their property and that we were actively working on solutions. We conducted literature reviews and monitored growth and development of plants. We also hosted a community weed pull on Sesame Street to remove a lot of the plants and seed pods. In summer 2022, we continued outreach with local residents in the municipality, continued monitoring and surveys, and hosted another community weed pull. We also used chemical control for the first time, so we sprayed a domestic grade herbicide, Roundup, only in the high priority area where no control methods have previously been implemented. So this was in an area that we didn't do a manual weed pull or manual removal the previous year. And we came out of this with a community-based management plan that highlights the need for public outreach and citizen science. We had great uptake from the community on this project. Everybody was so supportive and really helped work with us instead of against us, which sometimes can happen when removing plants. We had early detection, rapid response, highlighted in the community-based management plan as a priority for future populations. And then we also highlighted different control methods as well as the need for restoration. So once this patch becomes eradicated, we are hoping to restore native biodiversity there by planting some native plants. The next steps for this project include continued community involvement and outreach, hopefully eradicating dog-strangling vine from this area in the next couple of years, restoring the vegetation with native species, and then finally rolling this project out to the Dartmouth population. The next species that I'll talk to you about is Phragmites. There are two subspecies of Phragmites. We have Phragmites australis americanus and Phragmites australis australis. For the sake of this presentation, we'll be focusing on the invasive subspecies, which is Phragmites australis australis. So Phragmites is a perennial wetland grass that is highly invasive in North America. Common names for this subspecies include European common reed grass, and elephant grass. And the invasive subspecies is native to Eurasia and likely arrived in North America in the 1800s by seeds in soil ballasts or by horticultural trade. The earliest record of this species in Canada is a specimen collected in Annapolis Royal, Nova Scotia in 1910. Invasive Phragmites is one of the largest grass species in Nova Scotia with an average height of 2 meters, and in other Canadian provinces such as Ontario, it is known to grow up to 5 meters in height. And Phragmites can spread to new areas through underground rhizomes, above ground stolons, and seed dispersal. So I'm going to go over the impacts of Phragmites to biodiversity, ecosystem function, and infrastructure. So first, for biodiversity, as we see with most invasive species, it outcompetes native species for important resources like space, and then we see dense monocultures, which don't allow for native vegetation. Next, we have ecosystem function, specifically for wetlands. Over 50% of species protected under law in Nova Scotia depend on wetland ecosystems for survival, and the introduction of invasive Phragmites could displace these species from critical habitats. In regions where invasive Phragmites are prolific, they can alter ecosystem function. Most notably, they can alter wetland water levels and surface topography. Wetland water levels are reduced by the increased localized sediment accumulation caused by both trapped sediment and increased organic material from the abundant leaf litter. Over time, the greater accumulation of sediment and large underground biomass elevates the wetland surface. In addition, Phragmites can alter wetland decomposition characteristics. It has greater litter production due to its copious amounts of above-ground biomass, and the litter takes longer to decompose in comparison to native wetland plant species. This abundant, slowly decomposing leaf litter has been shown to impede the establishment of native plant species. Finally, for infrastructure, Phragmites is a really big problem over in Ontario, and it's estimated that in 2019, the province of Ontario spent $3.1 million on detection, prevention, and control measures for this species. This grass species can invade agricultural fields, impeding farming practices, and block drainage ditches. Stands growing by roadways can damage asphalt through rhizome growth, and the general reduction in biodiversity may have negative impacts on recreational activities such as sport fishing. So the first step we had to take was learning how to identify the native species, subspecies from the invasive subspecies. So the first characteristic you can look at is the stem nodes. In native species, it'll be shiny and reddish purplish, where in the invasive species, it's typically like a tan green and it's dull. So here's some good comparisons. The second thing we can look at is the leaf. So the native species are lighter yellow-green, and the invasive species are kind of a dark blue-green, as we can see here. Next, we can look at the ligule. So the ligule for the invasive species is less than half as large as the native subspecies, and the invasive subspecies is hairy, so you'll see these white hairs coming up at the top of it. But yeah, you can look for this black band when you peel back the leaf sheath, and that helps identify them as well. Finally, you can look at growth habits. Native subspecies typically can co-occur with other plant species, whereas you'll see a monoculture with invasive frag. Here is the distribution of Phragmites in North America. And here's the current distribution in Nova Scotia. So we did surveys this past summer, and surveys included the 100 series highways, trunk routes, and collector routes. And prior to designing the routes, databases were consulted to determine the locations of previously observed Phragmites stands, and these databases include iNaturalist and the Canadian Biodiversity Information Facility, CBIF, and these were confirmed for presence. So survey routes were designed in a manner to visit these observations and drive along as many high traffic roadways as efficiently as possible. If Phragmites was found when driving along a route, the driver pulled over at a safe location and the length of the stand along the road was recorded. The stand width was also recorded if it was possible to do so. These measurements were then used to calculate the square meter coverage of the stand. Coordinates of the perimeter of the stand were recorded. So for all of Nova Scotia, 8 stands were confirmed from 19 previous observations from CBIF, and 26 stands were confirmed from the 60 observations on iNaturalist, which brings us to 34 of 79 total observations that were confirmed. Some of the remaining 45 were duplicate observations, misidentified, historic records where there has since been development, or we were unable to locate the stand, so perhaps we had the wrong coordinates. So an overview is we found 52 total stands, and 18 of these were new stands that we just discovered this past year. And then specifically in Kespukwitk, 8 stands were confirmed from 19 previous observations from CBIF, 16 stands were confirmed from the 40 on iNaturalist, so that gives us a total of 24 of the total 59 previous observations were confirmed. We had 31 total stands in Kespukwitk, and then we discovered 7 new stands from our surveys. Next steps for this project include rolling out these survey methods to the rest of Nova Scotia. We didn't exclusively survey Kespukwitk in this project, but that was the focus. The only reason there were other observations was because our field technician worked out of Halifax, so he did notice some stands kind of incidentally on his way to Kespukwitk. So it would be great if we could roll out these survey methods to the rest of the province and then explore management options and maybe come up with a management plan for this species. So thank you so much for listening to this presentation. You can sign up for our newsletter. We have quarterly newsletters by visiting our website, www.nsinvasives.ca, and we also are pretty active on Twitter and Facebook. If you have any questions at all, my contact info is in the bottom left corner, and don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you so much.